Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with the men and women whose work, ideas and philosophies have shaped modern contemporary India. My guest today catalyzed and initiated an astonishing revolution, often forgotten and underestimated, that had a decisive impact on the destiny of India and many developing countries in Asia. He was recently nominated by Time magazine as one of the most influential Asians of the century. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Swaminathan. Welcome, sir. Your work with the Green Revolution involved a lot of work with genetic engineering. Suddenly there seems to be a fear that somehow when you begin to manipulate genes of plants and in nature, that could have detrimental effects, or we're tampering with nature.
Well, the genetic engineering, which today is causing public concern, correctly so, is very different from what we did in the days of producing varieties, genetic varieties, which can respond well to water and to nutrients and soil fertility. Those were done by what we generally call Mendelian breeding, that is, the laws of Mendel. Gregor Mendel was an Austrian monk who published his laws of inheritance using peas, 1865. But like all major discoveries, it took 35 years to understand the significance of what he wrote in 1865. In 1900, at the beginning of this century, the Mendel's laws were rediscovered. They provide an opportunity to crossbreed, to bring genetic material from different parents and produce a variety which is, say, hardy, resistant to pests and diseases, at the same time which can use water and nutrients from the soil. And that was the base. But today's concern is working at the molecular level. At the molecular level, almost playing God today in terms of taking out small bits from totally unrelated material. For example, from mice to man or something of that kind. Everything is possible today. And that across sexual barriers is something which is causing concern from a number of angles, from the biosafety angle, bioethical angle many times, like cloning and so on, and the nutritional safety, the hazards to the human beings as a result of certain antibiotic markers. So a whole issues of safety, ethics, and also the nutritional safety, and above all certain concerns like monopolistic trends of certain commercial firms. So you have a number of issues involved in terms of modern concerns about genetic engineering, which were not there in the 50s and 60s when we were working on new breeds of rice or wheat or sorghum and millet and corn and other cotton and so on.
I think in your work in the 60s there was an intimate relationship between your work as a scientist and your work as an administrator, that you developed these new breeds, but they required different irrigation techniques, they required the import of grain from Mexico. How did that sort of interaction evolve and work out?
One, I would say, for progress you require technology. Once you have a technological breakthrough, that alone cannot reach the people, particularly in farming, and particularly in our country, where today over 100 million farming families, out of them 75 million are very small and marginal farmers with very poor resources, 1 hectare or less. Therefore, unless you have appropriate public policies, technology and public policy synergy is very important to reach the poor and reach the poor farmers. Fortunately, in those days, there was a very good leadership, political leadership. So I would say technology alone, we could have had the technology in our own experiment station. It would have never gone to the field. But we also did one thing. We also got permission from government and also some money from government to demonstrate our technology in very poor farmers' fields. 1964, what we call the National Demonstration Program. And farmers have always said harvesting is believing, not just seeing alone. Unless the harvest comes home, they won't believe. And when farmers who were getting 1 ton of wheat got 5 tons, or 1 ton of rice got 5 tons, then it had a dramatic impact.
What were some of the key elements in the success of this? We normally associate initiatives, national initiatives which involve the government, to sort of end up in failure. There are a few exceptions. We had this whole The Operation Flood has been another area that has been successful. Of course, the Green Revolution had a very decisive impact, not just on India, but in the Asian countries. So as someone who sort of conceptualized and came up with this, what were the elements that suggest models and structures that are responsible for success that we could perhaps try and replicate today?
All over Asia, you are quite right. Before the end of the World War, there was the Great Bengal famine. There were other famines all over Asia. Everyone was concerned with Asia's food security situation. It is at that time, I think, there were silver linings in the crowd. One, of course, the political systems also in Asia felt they must give priority. Anything else you can forego, but not food. You require some food and drinking water. These are basic requirements. So many leaders in our own country, Jawaharlal Nehru said, everything else can wait, but not agriculture, as early as 1948. This resulted in investment in rural infrastructure, in irrigation, in extension services through our own community development program, and also greater investment in agricultural research.
Do you think this was perhaps possible because the economy was less market-driven at that time?
This is very true. In those days, public good research was the predominant one, whether it is in food security or health security. The market was in fact, food crops were all called as subsistence crops. Cash crops were different. They were cotton or tobacco and sugarcane. In fact, there was a big distinction between, so the market was not interested in the food crops at all. So in the 1900 to 1947, our growth rate in agricultural food production was 0.01 or 0.02. That is why recurrent famines were the theme. We found that the governments had to, otherwise the only option was import. Our own country was importing between the 50s and up to about 68, 69, very large quantities of grains, particularly wheat from North America under the PL 480 program of the United States. And all political leaders realized this cannot be a perpetual solution because, as I have repeatedly said, one of the problems in the field of agriculture, many people don't understand, is agriculture is the mainstay of livelihood, not merely feeding the urban population. 70% of the jobs in this country coming from agriculture. Therefore, agricultural development is critical, not only for the purpose of feeding a growing population, but also ensuring that a very vast segment of your population have livelihood opportunities. And that is why the jobs, income and food, the triple objectives of agriculture, I think obviously made the political systems, not only in our country, Indonesia, for example, made a great stride. Take Vietnam, for example. I was sent in Vietnam immediately after the unification of Vietnam in 1976 to help in trying to develop a strategy for improving rice production in that country. It was hopeless. I mean, we had to divert a ship from which was coming to us to Vietnam. This year, Vietnam has exported 4.5 million tons of rice. They were completely sufficient. So you had the commitment of governments to provide the infrastructure necessary in terms of minimum infrastructure, proper irrigation, and land reform also was a very important consideration in many countries.
What do you think have been some of the key social implications of the new strategies in agriculture and the struggle of the small farmer as new technologies demand economies of scale? What have been the implications of that, do you feel?
One thing was clear in the 60s when the technologies were being developed, when we were demonstrating, our technologies were very good for small farmers because the smaller the farm, the greater is the need for a marketable surplus. They require something to sell. Otherwise, if they only practicing subsistence farming, they had no money at all. Whether it is in milk, whether it is in wheat or rice, they need some surplus. So in that way, high yield technologies were very good for them. On the other hand, they were not resource neutral. Inputs are needed for output. For example, if you grow rice or wheat, you require a certain amount of nutrients, certain amount of water to give higher yields. And so that is why in the early 70s, the government of India started programs like Small and Marginal Farmers Program, Landless Labor Programs. They were essentially credit and input supply programs to ensure that the credit and the inputs needed for a certain amount of output, a quantum of output, are available to the small producers. Because social scientists rightly said, otherwise technologies will increase disparities, income disparities. The poor will get poorer and the rich will get richer. And I would say, at least in agriculture, we can say, for those who have got land and those who have got water, they have all benefited, whether they were larger farmers, but it is not so in dry farming areas, in the unirrigated areas. But in the irrigated areas, all farmers, the smaller farmers certainly have had more surplus produce to sell. And that is one of the reasons why in our country, relatively, I would say, although we have enormous amount of poverty, relatively the agricultural progress has not created that kind of, upsurge of social tensions as in the many African countries and so on.
How sustainable do you think the revolution is? Will we need fresh approaches, more genetic engineering to come out with newer varieties? Because this was something that happened in the 60s. Do you see that momentum is being maintained? Our population continues to grow at a galloping pace. There's greater pressure on farmers to come up with cash crops.
We have serious concerns about the future food security in our country. Not only in our country, many of the other countries who are similarly placed. In fact, several authorities have again started doomsday predictions. Malthus was kept at check, but not for long. You will have the problem of population food supply and population water supply, more than drinking water supply. Many of these are going to come. What is important is these are solvable problems. One thing in technology, let me say, technology always makes progress. So long as the human mind works, you can't stop it. Like the information technology, you see the enormous explosion. Nobody thought can happen. So you find every field of technology, so long as human beings are in the spirit of invention and innovation is not curbed, you find there will be more and more new knowledge.
You see limits to the ability of technology to produce and provide food. Or do you see sort of in some visionary way substitutes to food as we know it? I mean, maybe things that are completely synthetically created in the laboratory and you don't even have to go back to the earth.
Well, I wish it were possible. I would say, as one working in this field for the last 50 years, I wish what you say can be done. Unfortunately, we have to depend on Mother Earth, Mother Soil. It is going to be our savior. It has been our savior ever since human beings arose on this earth. The laboratory-grown kind of material is very energy expensive unless one finds a very new source of energy. So, coming back to the future of our food security, the fears are three kinds. One is ecological. Are we over-exploiting the water table? Is it going down? And are we over-exploiting the soil? Have we a policy? I must say that we have a policy vacuum in our country in terms of conservation of the basic foundations of agriculture, particularly land, soil and water. Soil is being used indiscriminately. You can make brick, you can make anything. You can just divert prime agricultural land for non-farm purposes. Similarly, we have no real regulation in the exploitation of underground water. We don't really capture all the rainwater, recycle it and so on. So we have a policy vacuum there unless it is addressed. That's why I repeatedly said technology is not a substitute for policy. There has to be a synergy, interaction between the two, multiplier effect. Therefore, without policy, in policy vacuum, technology can. The other kind of fears are whether the Frankenstein, the new technologies, the genetically modified organisms and so on. I've also already mentioned there are serious issues. I personally feel that what has already been done in the United Kingdom, United States and many European countries, we must have a very broad-based commission, national commission on genetic modification, like atomic energy, some of these tools where public perception and public apprehensions must be addressed. You can't say they don't know, I only know. It's wrong. I am a scientist. But I say scientists alone cannot take decisions in certain matters. And we must have a broad-based body, including the media representatives, the non-governmental organizations, the women's organization, farmers groups. They must be confident that what is being recommended for consumption, human consumption, or for cultivation in the field is something where the benefits far outweigh the risks. There will always be benefits and risks, but the human character or planning is you have to have a careful, rational, dispassionate analysis of benefits and risks. And a neutral body must come to the conclusion that this is the larger public good and not for the commercial good, but the larger public good. So we have to develop new instruments. You see, after all, the old instruments served us well. We have to have new policies And this is why I'm hoping when the new parliament comes, a priority in the last 10 years, there has been a proposal for an agricultural policy for this country, which will include the ecological issues, the social issues, the concern of the small and marginal farmers. Above all, a holistic approach to farm and non-farm employment, because the rural non-farm employment holds the key today for food security at the level of the individual. 60% of our rural population is landless. What do you do for the landless poor? Should they come and lie down in the pavements of cities and cause urban slums? Or are you going to create rural livelihoods? I am very optimistic in two fronts. One is there's enormous scope for improving the productivity further. Our yields are very low. Our average yields are very low in relation to what is possible, even with technologies on the shelf, not that new technologies have to come. In rice, for example, instead of 80 to 85 million tons, we can produce 200 million tons. With the technologies on the shelf, with the land, 40 million hectares now under cultivation. So we have enormous untapped reservoir in terms of production, if we use it wisely. Secondly, we have also the kind of enormous infrastructure in this country in terms of science and technology, both frontier technologies as well as traditional technologies, traditional wisdom. We must have the wisdom to combine the two and use them wisely.
You have a foundation that is working in precisely this area of being able to draw upon traditional wisdom. Traditional wisdom as far as, well, I wouldn't use the word genetic engineering, but in the manner in which the farmers have traditionally mixed and matched crops.
We call it ecotechnology, a combination of traditional wisdom with modern science. I have always, for example, people sometimes call about, nowadays there's a big debate on the intellectual property rights of local communities, local women and men. Many times people call a plant a medicinal plant. We forget the fact there are only plants in nature. Who gave that medicinal value? The medicinal value has been given by the local communities which have found it is good for this purpose or that purpose. And that is what they call the intellectual property rights of rural communities, tribal communities and so on. We have to go, we must go more and more. If you want to go in ecological thinking is one of harmony. One of harmony, not of conflict, not of confrontation, but bringing together. In the same way, whether it's technology, we should not worship something because old, or dislike something which is new, or worship something because new. What is important is how to make a combination. This is what we are trying to do in our foundation.
What are some of the sort of interesting traditional practices that have come to light and have a bearing on contemporary practice?
Very large numbers have come. The people have started documenting them of late. We also have we have got a very extensive database in terms of conservation ethos of the local communities, conservation of varieties of crops, conservation
what are some of these?
Sacred, for example, they call it sacred grow. In the past, they invested with divinity and dignity plants. We are unique in this country. We have been even worship the non-living in the country because there's a reverence both to life and the non-life. And so you had in the past different methods of conservation. Sacred grows is one method. Even today, when you go to very, very poor parts of Orissa, it's always in the news, you'll find a woman conserving a whole section of large number of varieties of rices and many other crops. In the medicinal plants, they have enormous kind of wisdom. We have now more and more increasing, thanks to modern information technology, people are chronicling them also to fight for their rights in terms of some intellectual property rights for them. Even the World Intellectual Property Rights Organization called WIPO has now taken a very serious study of recognizing and rewarding indigenous wisdom. So when take water, there's a wonderful book here by Anil Agarwal and Sunita Narayan from the Center for Science and Environment on dying wisdom in water conservation. What they point out is even with 14,000 centimeters of rainfall at Cherrapunji, which we always in school books read at the highest rainfall in the world, you have drinking water problem in the month of March, April. You go to Barmer or Jaisalmer with less than 100 millimeters and so on, you get drinking water during summer because of their method of conservation. So in terms of water conservation, water use, I know in South India, every village community used to conserve water in the past by creating a tank around a temple. We now call it water harvesting and so on. But they had those traditions. Now it is important in our school books, in our college books, not to make it feel that our ancient traditions, values were useless. There is a revival today. People have started understanding, because there was harmony between human beings and nature in the past, which we had disrupted. Modern development, modern technology. But I think time has come for us in the 21st century, if it is to be known as a century. I hope it will be a century of harmony, harmonizing technologies, harmonizing the old and the new, and of course harmonizing all political systems for public good. All of them are important.
In an increasingly fragmented world, as you have moved from sort of your work as an empirical scientist to sort of larger issues of ethics and equity and rights, do you hold out a hope for the future, or are you despairing at the way the world is?
I believe strongly the future is one of great hope. There are three reasons. The first is very gradual spread of democratic systems of governance. And our own country, although it is now slow, but 73rd and 74th Amendment to the Constitution, empowering Panchayat Raj. Today they don't have either the administrative or legal or financial or technological empowerment. But it's a matter of time. It has to come. I think the more democratic. The second is the media. It's also associated with democracy. In a country where you have freedom of expression, and where the media is your mouthpiece in terms of expression, I think ethics and equity considerations will come very much on the fore. Already the genetically modified debate is spearheaded by the media, both in our country and in the United Kingdom and so on. It is really a media-driven debate on the questions of certain ethical principles and safety aspects of some of these technologies. And the third, I think, is modern scientists also. Increasingly there is a feeling that unless you have an integrated science, so-called social scientists and the hardcore technologists jointly, proactively, not post-mortem. In the past, the social scientists came after a discovery has been done, whether green revolution is bad or green revolution is good. But I think increasingly now, in modern biotechnology, many others, I see a tendency today. It has started very much in the industrialized countries. It must grow in our own countries. This compartment of social scientists who deal with ethics, equity issues, and the technologists who don't care, they said, you take it or leave it, what I do. I think that approach has to go. And I see a trend in these three directions: strengthening of democratic grassroots level institutions, strengthening of the role of media as the custodians of ecological security, food security, and so on. And thirdly, the whole question of a new fresh air in the world of science, where science, the dividing walls among scientists is breaking down gradually. If you read some of the publications which are coming out in leading scientific journal now, you'll find 25, 30 authors from 10 different institutions. They collaborate, they're different people. Some of them are social scientists and so on. And I think that is the way to go. And if it goes well, and above all, if we consider the primary role of science is not making money, but advancing the cause of human well-being, that every individual should have a healthy and opportunity, I would say, give an opportunity for productive and healthy life, then things will be right. And I feel that that is the way world will move. Otherwise, will disintegrate, social disintegration, conflicts, and violence will increase. I hope we will not go through it, and I also do not hope that we will go through once again the Malthusian cycle before the political system gets activated to provide the policy support which is needed. I don't think calamity should be the instigator of progress. Calamities do instigate. The world wars have been great periods of scientific knowledge and explosive progress. But I think we should not make it a habit that we need a big calamity to induce us to take proper action.
Thank you very much, Professor.
It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.